It started as one of those surreal headlines that felt more like a Saturday Night Live sketch than actual news: President Trump enjoys steak and ketchup during South Korea visit. But when Trevor Noah picked it up on The Daily Show, it turned into a cultural moment. The clip opened with dramatic Korean news footage, a slow zoom on Trump cutting into a well-done steak while aides tried to look diplomatic. The camera froze, then Trevor's voice cut in. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, ketchup diplomacy. Because nothing says international relations like Heinz on a $300 steak." The audience burst into laughter. But Trevor wasn't just mocking the meal, he was dissecting what it symbolized. To him, it was the perfect metaphor for how Trump approached world politics: bold, loud, unapologetically American, and completely lacking subtlety. The segment quickly trended under #KetchupDiplomacy. Within hours, memes flooded X, formerly Twitter. Trump shaking hands with chefs, ketchup bottles lined up like ambassadors. Yet behind the humor, Trevor asked a piercing question, one that turned the joke into a viral talking point. If this is how America shows respect to its allies, what does it do to its enemies? The crowd went silent. The laughter faded into applause. What began as a comedy monologue suddenly felt like a mirror to America's diplomacy in 2025, saturated, overdone, and leaving a stain that couldn't be wiped off. By the next morning, the phrase, ketchup diplomacy, had crossed continents. Korean newspapers ran headlines like, "American humor or insult," while Japanese outlets replayed clips of Trevor's segment with subtitles reading, "President saw spark storm." Even European journalists began quoting Trevor's line, "When your meal looks like a campaign rally, maybe it's time to check your priorities." Trevor Noah's team hadn't expected it to explode. What began as a 7-minute bit on cultural absurdity had evolved into a full-blown international talking point. Late-night comedy had just shaken up real diplomacy. CNN replayed the segment on loop, while Fox News accused Noah of mocking American tradition. Trevor, smiling through it all, leaned into the chaos. "Hey, if ketchup is America's secret weapon, maybe that's why we're losing friends and gaining calories." The internet couldn't get enough. Korean university students posted TikToks pretending to host diplomatic dinners with fries and ketchup. One Seoul cafe even renamed its burger the Trump set, served with extra sauce, because, as the menu said, America likes it red. But amid the laughter, a deeper theme began to surface. Commentators noted how Trevor's satire revealed the awkwardness of modern American diplomacy, a culture that sometimes traded empathy for spectacle. In forums, users debated whether the comedian had gone too far, or whether he had simply said what diplomats couldn't. Even within the White House, staffers felt the sting. One anonymous aide told a reporter, "It's not the steak jokes that hurt. It's that he made people laugh at the way we lead." The White House press briefing the following afternoon felt more like a roast than a diplomatic statement. Cameras flashed, reporters smirked, and Trump, clearly agitated, adjusted his tie before delivering his now infamous response. "You know, people are talking about ketchup. They're talking about food, but what they're really talking about is success. Nobody eats better than I do. Nobody respects South Korea more than I do. And Trevor Noah? He should thank me. I made his ratings go up." The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure if it was safe to laugh. But Trump wasn't joking. He leaned forward, his voice rising. "Ketchup's American. It's the taste of home. These people want to mock ketchup, they're mocking America." Sad. That clip, of course, became its own meme within minutes. TikTokers added dramatic violin music, cutting between Trump's speech and slow-motion ketchup pours. Trevor Noah's team posted a reaction video titled, "The Sauce Has Spoken." The internet went nuclear. Behind closed doors, staffers tried to shift the narrative. Aides drafted statements about culinary diplomacy, insisting the steak dinner symbolized America's strength and comfort. But it was too late, the story had outgrown the administration's control. Every attempt to defend the Ketchup summit only made it more absurd. Meanwhile, Trevor doubled down on his next show. "Mr. President, no one's mocking Ketchup. We're mocking what you did with it, just like the world's mocking what you're doing with America's reputation." The audience erupted. It wasn't just a joke anymore, it was a metaphor for image, ego, and the fragility of power in a world that never stops watching. By sunrise in Washington, the story had already gone global, not as news, but as entertainment, irony, and embarrassment all wrapped into one. British tabloids plastered headlines like, "The President, the Steak, and the Sauce Heard Round the World." French commentators called it, "une tragédie américaine en trois saveurs," an American tragedy in 3 flavors. In Seoul, cable anchors tried to stay serious while replaying Trump's Ketchup defense, but even translators couldn't keep a straight face. And in the middle of this circus, Trevor Noah's monologue was now being analyzed in foreign policy think tanks. A viral tweet from a Korean diplomat read, "When comedians explain America better than ambassadors, you know diplomacy has lost its flavor." The internet lit up again. Artists posted political cartoons of Trump sitting at a global banquet table, ketchup dripping onto international treaties. A Brazilian comedian remixed Trump's speech into a reggaeton track titled "Sad Sauce," and it hit 10 million streams in 2 days. But not everyone was laughing. Within political circles, the moment sparked unease. Was the president's defensiveness a reflection of deeper insecurity? Commentators on CNN speculated, Trump's reaction shows how satire can wound the powerful more than politics ever could. Meanwhile, Trevor Noah used his next segment to make one thing clear. This isn't just about food, it's about how power reacts when it's mocked. And right now, power looks like a man holding a bottle of ketchup and calling it leadership. The crowd roared. But beyond the laughs, the moment felt heavier. It wasn't just comedy anymore, it was commentary. And for once, it seemed the whole world was watching America's joke play out in real time. By the 5th day, what started as a late-night punchline had evolved into a full-blown online movement. The hashtag #KetchupGate dominated global trends, not just on Twitter, but on TikTok, Instagram, and even LinkedIn, where professionals were now debating the optics of condiment diplomacy. Teenagers turned the president's dinner into an aesthetic challenge, slow-motion shots of ketchup pouring over steak to dramatic orchestral music. TikTokers across Asia captioned clips with phrases like, "when foreign policy is medium rare." Memes flooded Reddit. One showed Trump in a chef's hat, holding a ketchup bottle like a nuclear code. Another replaced the UN logo with a Heinz label. But then, the satire deepened. Activists began using #KetchupGate to highlight food insecurity and government hypocrisy. In the US, community kitchens tweeted things like, "While leaders argue about condiments, 34 million Americans can't afford a meal. #feed people not egos." That post alone hit 15 million views. Late-night comedy had triggered a wave of real conversation. For Trevor Noah, this was the moment it all clicked. Laughter wasn't the end, it was the ignition. He told his writers, "We're not roasting dinner. We're serving reality." Meanwhile, the White House scrambled. Press secretaries tried to flood the news cycle with serious policy stories, but journalists kept circling back to ketchup, now a global symbol of tone-deaf leadership. One reporter bluntly asked during a briefing, "Mr. President, when Americans can't pay rent, do you think it's appropriate to brag about steak dinners abroad?" Trump dismissed it as fake seasoning. But the damage was done. For the first time, the ketchup bottle had become a mirror, and America didn't like the reflection. By week 2, #KetchupGate had mutated from meme to political landmine. What had begun as late-night humor was now echoing through Capitol Hill's marble halls. Senators were referencing it in speeches, late-night hosts were quoting senators quoting Trevor Noah, and the White House communications team was drowning in a sauce storm of their own making. A Republican senator from Maine nervously told reporters, "Look, the president can eat what he wants, but diplomacy is not dinner theater." Within hours, that clip was spliced next to Trevor's now iconic monologue, the one where he leaned forward, smiled, and said, "If the president can't handle a meal without turning it into a power move, maybe the table's not the problem." The line hit like a thunderclap. Cable networks replayed it non-stop. Political analysts dissected it as if it were Shakespeare. Suddenly, even conservative talk shows were forced to address the ketchup diplomacy controversy. But the real eruption came when a Democratic senator from California went viral for holding up a ketchup bottle during a live committee hearing and declaring, "This administration is more concerned with condiments than conditions, of people, of policy, of truth." That single gesture turned a cultural mockery into a national referendum on ego-driven politics. Protesters outside the Capitol carried signs that read, "Feed the nation, not the narrative," and "Ketchup is not policy." Trump, of course, fired back on Truth Social. "These people hate America's traditions. Ketchup built this country." Within an hour, Trevor Noah's writers had already turned that line into the opening sketch of The Daily Show's next episode. The audience couldn't stop laughing, but behind the laughter, there was something else brewing. A recognition that this wasn't just about one man's dinner anymore. It was about America's appetite for distraction, and the comedians who refused to let it slide down easy. The next act of the drama unfolded live, unfiltered, unedited, and unhinged. Trump appeared on a conservative news show, his jaw tight, his posture stiff, his tone oscillating between self-defense and outrage. It was supposed to be a controlled interview to set the record straight. Instead, it became the meltdown broadcast that every network replayed for days. He leaned toward the camera, eyes blazing. "They're saying I embarrassed America? No, I represented America. I had steak. I had ketchup. Real American food. Not those fancy foreign things." The host tried to steer him toward policy questions, but Trump wasn't done. He jabbed the air with his finger, practically shouting, "These so-called comedians, losers. They think they're funny. Trevor Noah? Never heard of him. Probably jealous. I've done more for ketchup than anyone in history." It was surreal. The cheering at the bottom of the screen read, "President defends ketchup diplomacy, again." By the end of the segment, his face was flushed, and the audience at home was speechless, half in disbelief, half in second-hand embarrassment. Within minutes, social media exploded. Memes labeled it, "Sauce Rage Live." One clip, Trump slamming the desk as he declared, "Ketchup is freedom," racked up 100 million views overnight. Even foreign governments couldn't resist subtle jabs. A Canadian minister tweeted, "We prefer maple syrup diplomacy." Meanwhile, Trevor Noah opened that night's show with a mock-solemn tone. "You know it's bad when the president argues with condiments on live TV. At this point, ketchup should have its own press secretary." The crowd roared, but there was an undercurrent of disbelief. America was watching its leader unravel over sauce, and somehow, it felt like a perfect metaphor. The meltdown wasn't just about food. It was about pride, perception, and the terrifying fragility of ego when faced with ridicule. By the next morning, Trump's meltdown had crossed every border, every language barrier, and every time zone. What began as a single awkward dinner in Seoul had morphed into an international media circus. Asian news outlets ran headlines that seemed torn between disbelief and satire. South Korea, U.S. President defends ketchup as symbol of strength. Japan, steak and sauce, new frontier of American diplomacy. China, Trump says ketchup represents freedom. Internet says, maybe cholesterol too. The story became global shorthand for political absurdity. Late-night comedians in Australia, South Africa, and the UK jumped in. A popular Seoul-based talk show aired a parody titled, "The Diplomat Who Loved Sauce." It showed an actor in a blonde wig dramatically squeezing ketchup onto a peace treaty. Even the United Nations couldn't resist a little shade. During a press briefing, one journalist asked, will the U.S. table condiments at the next G7? The room burst into laughter, something unheard of in diplomatic circles. Trevor Noah, watching from his dressing room, realized he had inadvertently lit a global fire. His next episode opened with a world map covered in ketchup splatters and the caption, "From Seoul to the Senate, the sauce heard around the world." He looked into the camera with mock sincerity. You know, when the rest of the world laughs at you, it's not always because you're funny. Sometimes, it's because they're relieved it's not them. The crowd went wild, and quiet. For a brief moment, the laughter turned thoughtful. The absurdity had peeled back something real, a world both amused and alarmed by how easily America's dignity could drown in spectacle. As one British columnist wrote the next day, "Empires don't collapse from war alone. Sometimes, they slip on ketchup." Trevor read that line on air and whispered, "And sometimes, they make a meme about it." The next evening, the studio lights dimmed, the applause settled, and Trevor Noah stepped onto the stage for what would become one of his most replayed monologues ever. Gone was the cheeky grin, in its place stood a performer who understood the weight behind the laughter. The audience sensed it too, the jokes had transformed into something deeper. He began softly. "Last week, the world laughed at America. Not because of policy, not because of ideology, but because of ketchup." The crowd chuckled, unsure if they should. Trevor smiled, letting the silence linger. A leader's job isn't to make a meal look strong, it's to make people feel seen. Yet somehow, we've mistaken ego for courage, and comfort food for diplomacy. He paced the stage slowly, hands clasped behind his back. The screen behind him lit up with stills from Seoul, the steak, the ketchup bottle, Trump's fiery speech. Trevor turned, pointed at the image, and said, "You can't drown the truth in sauce. Eventually, the world still tastes what's real." That line hit like poetry. The audience erupted, but this time the applause wasn't just for humor, it was for honesty. Even the crew stood still, watching a comedian become a mirror to power. Trevor continued, his tone both sharp and compassionate. "America's not broken because it's laughed at. It's laughed at because it forgot how to listen. The world isn't mocking us, it's waiting for us to wake up." He ended the segment with a soft smile. "So, Mr. President, if you're watching, maybe next time, skip the ketchup. Try humility instead. It goes with everything." The studio erupted, cheers, laughter, and that rare, electric feeling when truth meets entertainment. Within 24 hours, the monologue had over 200 million views. Hashtags like #TruthWithKetchup and #NoahForPresident trended globally. Political analysts called it the roast that rewrote late night. For the first time in weeks, the story wasn't about Trump's tantrums, it was about how humor, wielded with conscience, could still cut through the noise and reach something real. The following days felt strangely quiet. The chaos had settled, the memes had peaked, and yet something lingered, a collective unease hidden beneath the laughter. Across America, clips of Trevor Noah's final monologue replayed not just for entertainment, but as a kind of mirror. People weren't just laughing at Trump anymore, they were starting to question what his behavior said about them. Cable news debated whether comedians had become the new moral compass. Social media feeds filled with comments like, "Trevor said what we all wanted to say," and, "It's funny until you realize it's true." Even a few conservative pundits, normally quick to defend, admitted privately that the segment had hit a nerve. Trevor himself didn't gloat. In an interview a week later, he simply said, "Comedy's not about humiliation, it's about illumination. If the world's laughing at you, maybe it's time to ask why." That line went viral again, this time as a quote printed on t-shirts, posters, and protest signs. Across college campuses and comedy clubs, young performers started mimicking his tone, fierce, funny, and unafraid. Ketchup diplomacy became shorthand for political absurdity, a reminder that power without self-awareness always ends in farce. Back in Washington, Trump pretended to shrug it off. But insiders said he'd banned ketchup from the White House menu for a week. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Trevor's closing words from that historic episode continued echoing through the noise of the internet, now stitched into the fabric of late-night history. Maybe laughter won't fix us, but it's a start. Because the moment we stop laughing, we stop caring. And that's when we truly lose ourselves. The screen faded to black. The applause was thunderous, yet somehow solemn. America laughed, but this time, it understood why. In this unforgettable viral moment, Trevor Noah breaks down Trump's bizarre, ketchup diplomacy during his South Korea visit, and turns a dinner gone wrong into a global conversation about ego, humility, and leadership. Watch Trevor's sharp humor and heartfelt monologue that had the world laughing, thinking, and questioning all at once.